All right, so picture this. You wake up one morning, check the news, and bam, there's a brand new U.S. government department. And not just any department, but one totally fixated on tech. Not just like tinkering around the edges, but with real power, shaping the future of how we use and live with technology, the whole shebang. That's what we're diving into today.
We got our hands on this, well, it's like a blueprint from Department.Technology. And let me tell you, it's seriously detailed. Like,
Yeah.
they really thought this through. They lay out this whole framework for a Federal Department of Technology, and they call it the DOT for short. And it gets into the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of how this thing would actually work.
And here's why you should care. We're talking AI, cybersecurity, data privacy, all that stuff that's kind of already running our lives, right?
Right.
This framework is trying to wrangle all of that head on.
And let me tell you, this document, it doesn't mess around. It jumps right into it, lays out the DOT's potential authority. And we're talking big picture stuff here. This wouldn't be just another bureaucratic arm. Oh, no, this would be the agency, established by Congress, overseeing everything tech from AI and robotics to, well, the internet itself.
You got it. And that's where things get, well, really interesting. See, right now, who's in charge of tech? It's all over the place. Different agencies, different rules, kind of a mess.
Yeah.
This DOT, it would pull all of that together, streamline things, which on paper sounds great. But, and this is a big but, it also means a ton of power concentrated in one place. And that, well, that always deserves a closer look, wouldn't you say?
It definitely raises some questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, remember all the cyber attacks on government agencies a while back? Well, with this framework in place, the DOT could just step in, boom, impose emergency cybersecurity rules on every single federal agency.
That's a lot of work.
Right.
It is, no doubt. And the document, it gets into how that power would be structured. They've got a whole hierarchy mapped out, starting with, you guessed it, the Secretary of Technology, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, the whole 9 yards. But here's where it gets kind of interesting. There's also this Technology Oversight Committee, or TOC for short.
Okay, so it's not just one person calling all the shots.
Exactly, that's the idea. The TOC is where they try to build in some, well, checks and balances. You'd have tech experts, legal experts, even public representatives all on this committee. Plus, the DOT would have to, report back to Congress regularly, keep them in the loop. Some of those meetings would be open to the public, some closed doors, depending on the sensitivity of the info. Transparency, but also, national security and all that.
Got it. So trying to find that balance makes sense. But even with all that oversight, we're still talking about a seriously influential position here. This DOT, just imagine the kind of rules and regulations they could put into place, the reach they would have.
And it's not just about cybersecurity, right? Think about something like data privacy. We're talking about the potential to set standards for how every government agency collects, stores, uses our personal information, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, now that's where I start to get a little, uneasy. Where do we draw the line between necessary regulation and, Big Brother, right? Where does it end?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something this whole document seems to be wrestling with, especially when you get into the balance of power between the federal government and individual states.
Right, because states have their own laws, their own tech ecosystems already in place, right?
Yeah.
So how does this proposed DOT, fit into all of that? Where's the line?
So one of the most, I'd say, striking things about this framework is how much emphasis they put on collaboration. They actually use the phrase good faith when they're describing how the DOT would work with state and even local technology departments. They really want to hammer that home.
Good faith.
Yeah.
That's not exactly your typical legal jargon, is it?
Yeah, you don't see that every day in official documents. And I think it speaks to the sensitivity around this whole thing, right? Creating a federal tech department, it could be seen as a power grab, So they're bending over backwards to emphasize cooperation, make it clear they want to work with states, not just dictate from on high.
Okay, so how would that actually work in the real world? Got any concrete examples?
Absolutely. Let's say the DOT wants to, create a national strategy for something like, modernizing the power grid, making it smarter, more resilient, all that good stuff. They could offer states funding, expertise, you name it, but ultimately it'd be up to each state to figure out how to actually implement those changes, within their own borders.
Okay, so it's more like the DOT would offer a roadmap.
Yeah.
But states wouldn't be forced to follow it to the letter. They'd have some flexibility.
Exactly. It's about setting national priorities, but also recognizing that Montana's going to have different needs and approaches than, say, California, right? One size fits all doesn't really work when it comes to tech.
Yeah, that makes sense. But let's be real. Even with the best intentions, anytime you're talking about something as powerful as tech, the potential for, I don't know, overreach, it's always lurking, right? So what's to stop this DOT from becoming too powerful, too controlling?
That, my friend, is where things like public oversight and accountability come in. And to be fair to them, the people behind this document, they do seem to get that, at least on paper.
All right, so let's unpack that a little. How exactly would they make sure this DOT doesn't turn into like a tech overlord dictating every aspect of our digital lives?
Well, they propose, well, for starters, a whole system of like audits and reviews, both
Right.
from inside the DOT and from outside,
Right.
checks and balances for the digital age, that kind of
Right.
thing.
Break that down for me. Who's doing these audits and what are they like looking for? What's the process?
So they're talking about a multi-layered approach. First off, you'd have these internal review boards, right? Like within the DOT itself. Their whole job is to make sure any new policies, any big moves the DOT wants to make, that they all line up with the department's mission. No overstepping, no funny business.
So kind of like an internal ethics committee, making sure everything passes the smell test.
Yeah, exactly. But it wouldn't stop there. They're also talking about independent audits, and these would be done by like outside organizations, think tanks, research groups, maybe even universities, just to get some fresh eyes on things.
And these external groups, they wouldn't be like beholden to the DOT in any way, totally independent.
Right, that's the whole point. You want truly independent eyes reviewing the DOT's work, right? Looking for any red flags, potential bias, mission creep, any unintended consequences they might not be seeing.
That's reassuring, at least on paper, right? But what about us, just regular folks? How would we know if the DOT is actually coloring inside the lines, so to speak? Or if these audits are actually working?
Well, that's where transparency comes in. And to their credit, whoever put this framework together, they seem to get that. There's actually a pretty, I'd say, robust system for public accountability baked into this thing.
Okay, so give me the rundown. What are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, they're talking about publishing these detailed annual reports on everything the DOT is doing, budget breakdowns, policy goals, the results of any audits or reviews, the whole 9 yards, all out in the open.
Okay, so full transparency on how they're using their power and taxpayer dollars. Let's not forget that part. That's definitely a good starting point. What else?
Right, and it wouldn't be just dry bureaucratic documents either. They're also talking about having this whole public-facing DOT website, like a digital town square, right? Where they'd have to post plain language summaries of their work, any proposed regulations, the results of any public comment periods, all of it, easily accessible.
So, like, if I'm worried about, I don't know, the DOT imposing some new rule about what I can or can't do online, I could just go to this website and see exactly what they're proposing and why.
Exactly. It's about giving the public a real-time view into how the DOT is making decisions and, making it easier for people to actually engage with the department. You could submit feedback, raise concerns, that kind of thing.
Okay, that's actually pretty cool. It's like they're trying to build in accountability from the ground up, right? Not just relying on, like, Congress or the White House to keep them in check.
Exactly. And there's another part of this whole public engagement thing that I find really interesting.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
They're proposing this thing called a Citizens Technology Advisory Board. Basically, it'd be a group of everyday people, maybe chosen through some kind of lottery system, who knows. But the point is, they would meet with DOT officials on a regular basis to, give them feedback, share their thoughts on policy decisions.
Wow, so they're serious about getting input from beyond, like,
Yeah.
the Washington, D.C. bubble.
Seems like it. And it makes sense, right? I mean, technology impacts every single part of our lives these days. So it stands to reason that the people who are most affected by these decisions, they should have a say in how things are run.
Totally agree with you there. It's like you wouldn't design a car without, actually talking to drivers.
Exactly. Now, all that said, we got to remember the devil's always in the details, right? How these transparency and accountability measures would actually work in practice, that remains to be seen.
Because we've all seen how these things can go sometimes. Good intentions only get you so far, unfortunately.
Oh, absolutely. But even if this whole thing, this framework, even if it never actually becomes law, I gotta say, just the fact that we're having this conversation, that we're actually sitting here thinking critically about how to govern something as powerful and as fast-moving as technology, I think that's a huge step in the right direction.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, this whole conversation has me thinking about the sheer power of technology, how quickly it's changing the world around us.
It really is mind-blowing when you stop and think about it. We're talking about the future of work, education, healthcare, even national security. Everything's on the line, really.
And we're still figuring out the rules of the road as we go, right?
Mhm.
Who gets to make those rules? How they're enforced? How we hold the people in charge accountable? It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And that actually brings us to another big piece of this whole puzzle, this whole framework. And that's the balance between federal oversight and, well, innovation. You can't have one without the other, right?
Exactly. You don't want to stifle progress, right?
Yeah.
Technology moves so fast, you got to be nimble, you got to be able to adapt. Otherwise, you're just going to get left in the dust.
100%. And the folks who wrote this document, they seem to get that. In fact, one of the main goals of this DOT, at least as they envision it, is actually to foster innovation. Not to be like this innovation killer, but to actually encourage it.
Okay, so how do they propose to do that? What's the plan?
Well, one idea is to have a whole office within the DOT, and this office would be solely focused on emerging technologies.
So like a team of what, futurists? Their whole job is just to think about the next big thing, what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. They'd be funding research, identifying promising new technologies, figuring out how to bring those technologies to market,
Yeah.
working with entrepreneurs, with businesses, the whole 9 yards.
Interesting. So it wouldn't be all about rules and regulations. They'd actually be actively involved in making stuff happen, pushing
Yeah.
the boundaries of what's possible.
Exactly. And get this. The document even talks about the DOT potentially setting industry standards for these new technologies. Think about it. If you've got a common set of standards for, I don't know, self-driving cars, artificial intelligence, it could make things a lot easier. Companies could develop and use those technologies faster, more efficiently, and hopefully more safely, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like a level playing field, right? Everybody's playing by the same rules. And it could also help avoid that whole mess of having different regulations in every single state, right?
Exactly. Consistency is key. But of course, there's always the flip side. If you set those standards too early, you could end up stifling innovation, right? Or, and this is the big one, the DOT could end up playing favorites, favoring certain companies or technologies over others.
It's tough, right? Trying to walk that line between encouraging progress, but not putting your thumb on the scale, picking winners and losers.
No doubt. It's a delicate balance, for sure. And it's not just about finding that balance at the federal level either. The document, it talks a lot about how important states are in all of this, how they can foster innovation, too.
Which makes sense, because a lot of the really cool cutting-edge tech stuff, it's not happening in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
right? It's happening at the state and local level.
Exactly. Think about Silicon Valley, right? Or the whole biotech boom we've been seeing in Boston.
Yeah.
That's not top-down government planning. That's grassroots, bottom-up innovation.
So where does this proposed DOT fit into all of that? How do they tap into that energy?
Well, one idea they float is creating this kind of national clearinghouse for best practices in tech governance. The idea is that states could share what's working, the policies, the programs that are actually moving the needle. And the DOT could help connect states that are working on similar things, maybe facing similar challenges.
So like a knowledge sharing network,
Yeah.
right? Helping states learn from each other's successes and avoid repeating each other's mistakes. Let's be real.
Precisely. It's about harnessing that energy, that innovation that's already happening in the states all across the country and amplifying it, making it bigger than the sum of its parts.
I like it. But I got to be honest, something that keeps coming up for me, and maybe it's just me, but how do you even design a system to govern something as complex and as fast-moving as technology? By the time you write the rule book, it's already outdated.
$1 million question right there. And it's something the people behind this document, they definitely wrestle with it. It's not like they're shying away from the tough questions.
So what's their solution? How do you future-proof something like a Department of Technology?
Well, one of the big things they emphasize is flexibility. They're not naive. They know things change fast. So they're saying the DOT, it can't be this rigid, bureaucratic thing. It's got to be designed to adapt to new tech, new challenges as they pop up, which, let's face it, is going to be constantly.
So less about fixed rules, more about creating a framework that can evolve, change with the times.
Exactly. They use words like agile,
Mm-hmm.
This DOT has to be able to pivot quickly. It's a whole different way of thinking about government, that's for sure.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also requires a certain, leap of faith, right? You're basically saying, okay, we're going to create this really powerful entity, but trust us. The people in charge, they'll use that power wisely.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's why all that stuff we talked about earlier, the transparency, the accountability, making sure the public has a voice, that all becomes even more important, right?
Because ultimately, technology, it's a tool, right? It can be used for good or bad. And the way we choose to govern it, well, that's going to determine which path we go down. No pressure.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. And that actually brings us to something we haven't really touched on yet, which is what are the potential downsides to all of this?
Yeah, good point. I mean, we've talked a lot about the potential benefits of this Department of Technology, but every coin has two sides, right? Are there risks here we haven't even considered? Unintended consequences.
For sure. And that's something that deserves a lot more attention, a lot more thought. I mean, look, they lay out some safeguards in this document, but we got to be real. Creating a government agency with this much power, there are going to be risks, guaranteed.
Like what? What are some of those unintended consequences we should be thinking about?
Well, one that comes to mind is that this DOT, it could easily become, well, a bureaucratic behemoth, bogged down in red tape, slow to adapt, the kind of thing that makes people tear their hair out.
So the very thing it's supposed to be helping to manage the speed of technological change could end up being its downfall.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of ironic, wouldn't it?
Totally. And here's another one. What's to stop this DOT from being, well, influenced by special interests? We're talking big tech companies, lobbyists, all those folks with deep pockets and a vested interest in how these rules get written.
Okay, so we're talking about the potential for, like, regulatory capture.
Yeah.
Where the people writing the rules are, shall we say, a little too cozy with the companies they're supposed to be regulating.
Exactly. And that could lead to, well, let's just say policies that maybe don't serve the public interest quite as well as they could. Maybe they benefit a select few at the expense of, everyone else.
Not to mention the potential for, just straight up misuse of power. You're talking about a government agency with access to a ton of data, a lot of influence. There's always a risk that somebody could abuse that.
Oh, absolutely. It's crucial that whatever we do, we build in those guardrails, strong oversight to make sure things don't go off the rails.
Right. That's where that whole transparency and accountability thing comes back into play. Right.
100%. We got to make sure this DOT, if it happens, is answerable to the people, to us, not the other way around.
Well said.
Yeah.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone deep on this whole Department of Technology idea, the potential upsides, the potential pitfalls, the whole 9 yards.
We barely scratched the surface, to be honest, but it's a start, right?
Absolutely. So as we start to wrap things up here, I want to throw this out to our listeners, get them thinking about all of this. So we've spent this whole time, really digging into this whole Department of Technology thing, this DOT. Could it work? What would it mean for innovation, for regulation, for, well, our digital lives?
Big questions, right?
And we've seen how, at least on paper, they're trying to find that balance, encouraging new tech, but also putting up some guardrails, protecting people. It's tricky stuff. Tricky and absolutely crucial. But like with any big idea, you know what they say. The proof is in the pudding, or in this case, the execution. So as we wrap things up here, I really want to hear from our listeners. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, what do you think? Is this whole Department of Technology thing, is it the right move? Can they actually pull it off? Can they really encourage new technology but also protect us?
We've talked about the potential benefits, a national cybersecurity strategy, making sure everybody's on the same page when it comes to tech. But we've also talked about the risks. I mean, could this DOT become too powerful, too bureaucratic? Are there consequences we haven't even thought of yet? It's a lot to consider.
And don't forget about that whole transparency thing. If this DOT actually happens, it's got to be done in the open, right? With us, the public, keeping a close eye on things. Sunlight's the best disinfectant and all that.
Couldn't agree more. Because let's be real, technology itself, it's not good or bad, right? It's a tool. It's all about how we use it, how we manage it, how we make sure it serves us, not the other way around. And that's on us, right? All of us.
That's a great point to end on. We're just getting started with this conversation, really.
Exactly. So much more to explore here. In fact, I highly recommend head over to department.technology, check out this whole document for yourself. Read it, think about it, let us know what you think. Because the future of tech, it's too important to just sit back and let it happen to us. We all got to be part of shaping it, right?
100%. We can't just sit on the sidelines. This is our world we're talking about, right?
Well said. And on that note, folks, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But don't worry, we will be revisiting this, guaranteed. This conversation's far from over. But until then, keep those brains buzzing, stay curious, and as always, keep diving deeper. We'll catch you next time.